Good morning, students. Today's discussion is online on the Sublime by Longinus. In the previous discussions, we have studied Aristotle, the part of the Greek criticism or classical Greek criticism. And today on the Sublime by Longinus, this is a Greco-Roman criticism. On the Sublime is a Roman. The poetics came somewhere in 1st or 3rd century AD, means around 2-3 centuries. Sorry, there was a small interruption due to my network was lost. I have to shift over to my mobile hotspots. Okay, so here on the Sublime is a Roman era Greek work of literary criticism. And about Longinus, although we know that it is on the Sublime is related to this particular writer, but there was a debate over the period of a time whether this work is really written by Longinus or not. But then majority of the researcher now come to a conclusion that maybe this work is belong to this particular writer on the basis of some evidences. Some of them we are going to deal with here in these discussions. So the Longinus is having name Cassius Dionysius Longinus, and he was belonged to the 3rd century. So again, the birth year and the death year is not confirmed. Okay, so this is only probable dates we are having here, 213 and 273 AD. This is the birth and date time of Longinus. Obviously, his real name is also unknown. This is on the basis of some other document that his name is related with this particular work. And from the different sources, it is assumed that he was a Greek teacher of rhetoric or a literary critic who may have lived in the 1st or 3rd century. Obviously, his biographical details are unknown to us, because even this particular work on the Sublime is found fragmentary. So even many of the pages are now not available. Cassius received his education at Alexandria and became a teacher himself. And here you see he was supposed to be the disciple of Longinus, one of the great teachers in the Roman time. So Longinus was teaching at Athens, and then he later moved to Asia Minor, where he achieved the position of advisor to the king of Palmyra, Zenobia. Okay, to become advisor to Palmyra was a kind of a difficult task, later turned out to be On the Sublime is one of the most important ancient treatises on aesthetics. Now, when we talk about the beauty in literature, especially art, we already have a good idea from poetics as to how a poetry is to be composed, a tragedy is to be composed, how it can be converted into the excellent piece of literature, where we can get the beauty. So whenever we talk about the beauty, aesthetic pleasure out of art, so here, apart from Aristotle, now we have to look into some points from Longinus. So obviously from Greco-Roman tradition. So on the Sublime is one of the most important ancient treatises on aesthetics together with Aristotle's Poetics. The work is written in an epistolary form, has an artistic dimension of its own. So when it is an epistolary form, so obviously the writer is there discussing his ideas on literature in a later form. So as if he is writing a letter to someone, maybe his disciple or a friend, and then they are discussing over the making of literature, the sublimity of literature, or the grandeur of literature. The treatise is dedicated to Posthumus Terentianus, a cultured Roman and public figure. So Terentianus is a public figure and supposed to be the friend and disciple to the Longinus, whom this later was regarded. So from the beginning till end, this Terentianus was been involved in the discussion, and he was regarded. Longinus has been assumed to be either a Hellenized Jew or readily familiar with the Jewish culture. Now again, on the basis of his position, or on the basis of his, evidences found, okay, it is assumed that he was either a Hellenized Jew or readily familiar with the Jewish culture. And then he was the nephew and heir to Fronto, a Syrian rhetorician of the Emesa. And this was the reason why we see that he inherited the rhetorical studies or knowledge of rhetoric, which is reflected through this particular work. Then it was also found that he was a friend of mystic Neoplatonist Plotinus and Ammonius. The former called him the philologist, not a philosopher. So here, the identification of Longinus is as a philologist and not as the philosopher. Okay, now philologist is the one who is related to the work of words. It's related to some linguistic understanding, grammar understanding. Now Cassius was executed by Aurelian, the Roman emperor, who conquered Palmyra in 273 AD on charges of conspiring against the Roman state. Okay, now here it was assumed that he was executed by Aurelian, the Roman emperor, who conquered Palmyra in the year 273 on the charges of conspiring against the Roman state. Now here, since he was associated with the queen Palmyra of Zenobia, he was writing later on her behalf, and this was the reason why then he was came on the radar of Roman state. Okay, now we are coming back to the work on the Sublime. Now, in England, in the year 1544, Robert Lee and Manutius each published edition, and several pages of work have been lost. Therefore, we get fragmentary work. Okay, so the work was not completely found, and it was fragmentary in nature, so it was collected in a sequence and then it was published. The lost part may be very probably containing the secret of its period and authorship. Okay, so you see the majority of the pages or the main pages where the identification of the writer would be there that were removed, or you see not removed but lost. And this was the reason why the time period and authorship is not confirmed for this particular work. The idea of sublime played a central role in the work of romantic movement of 18th and 19th century. So you see, when we come to the work of Wordsworth, and especially the movement of romantics, so here the writer is again going back to the genius of the work. Okay, so this searching out the genius, okay, that is came from this particular work of on the Sublime. So Sublime, this is influencing the English criticism, especially during Romantic and Victorian period. Now here Longinus addresses his work as a letter to friend, probably a Roman pupil, Terentianus, discussing work of Caecilius on the Sublime. Now here on the Sublime is the work which is already published earlier, and on which now the copy of that Caecilius's work on the Sublime is not there, but now they are discussing on the work of that Caecilius here. Now dissatisfied with the essay of Caecilius, Longinus on request of Terentianus wrote to examine it. Okay, now here Longinus is hinted by his pupil Terentianus to write a review or write his opinion about this particular work of Caecilius. Okay, now we are going to the main text, and I'm just going through the majority of the points. I'm not again going to discuss each and everything out of it. Okay, because majority of the part is related to the example and references from different writers. So I'm omitting all that, and we are going to concentrate upon the important points so that we may be able to finish this book as soon as possible. So the treatise of Caecilius on the Sublime, when, as you remember, my dear Terentian, we examined it together, seemed to us to be beneath the dignity of the whole subject, to fail entirely in seizing the salient points and to offer little profit, which should be principal aim of every writer. Now here, in the beginning of this letter, Longinus is pointing out the work of Caecilius on the Sublime. And here already these two, means Longinus and Terentianus, both already have discussed over it. And since Terentianus has hinted him to write his opinion or write a detailed description on the work of Caecilius, here Longinus is putting forward his ideas. And in the beginning itself, he found the work is poor. Okay, so here he pointed out that that is to offer a little profit. Okay, so the work is offering no good treatise for them. Now here he further pointed out there are two essential things has to consider about the high quality in literature. Number one, to define the subject, and number two, to point out how and by what methods may become master of it ourselves. So obviously, writer has to decide about the subject of literature, because that subject need to be all time should be influencing the readership for ages. And this was the reason why a writer should have potential and understanding to take a particular proper subject for the work. And number two, the method, how to treat that particular subject in the literary genre. Okay, the treatment to that particular subject in a literary way will, I mean, decide the future of its beauty. Now here he is making one statement. And yet Caecilius, while wasting his efforts in 1,000 illustrations of the nature of the sublime, as though here we were quite in the dark, somehow passes by as immaterial the question how we might be able to exalt our own genius to a certain degree of progress in sublimity. So obviously he is still disagree with Caecilius, and here he is maintaining that it was a kind of a waste of efforts by Caecilius. Okay. Now here, the nature of sublime should be a lofty, should give a writer the real direction, right direction to take his work to the height. The sublime, wherever it occurs, consists in a certain loftiness. Now, whenever we talk about sublimity, okay, sublime, it consists in a certain loftiness, excellence of language, and that it is by this and this only that the greatest poet and prose writers have gained eminence and won themselves a lasting place in the temple of fame. Now, the writers like Aeschylus or Homer, now they are the great writers. Now, what makes them the great? Number one, the subject, already Longinus have already pointed out. And on the other, the language. Now here, this is what the root of sublimity we can consider. Now, this statement made by Longinus can be a route to sublimity. Now, what is he maintaining? Okay, now the sublime consists in a certain loftiness and excellence of language. So here, language is the medium to make a certain literature high or excellent. And that the greatest, and that is the only, he says, language is the only source of making making the part or making the work, sublime. And then he further maintained the greatest poets and prose writers have gained eminence and won themselves a lasting place in the temple of fame. So it's because of language, because of the mastery over language to take it on level above. Okay, so that potential makes them a famous writer. To believe or not is usually in our own power, but sublime acting with an imperious and irresistible force sways every reader whether he will or no. Now it is important, you see, language will certainly influence the readership. Now here we need to understand that even the Longinus think of the reader, even the Longinus think of its literature and its effects over reader. So obviously, if any writer want to influence the reader through the ages, okay, so obviously this particular idea of sublimity should be there. He further says, skill in invention, lucid arrangement, and disposition of facts appreciated not by one passage or by two, but duly manifest themselves in general structure. Now here, we'll go point by point. Skill in invention. Now here, writer must be having skill to invent good images, invent good plot, invent good character, okay, and obviously invent good words. Lucid arrangement, a simple arrangement so that a simple common man also could understand your literature. And then disposition of facts. So the facts entertained in the work should be lifelike, should be within the reach of a common human being. You know, far-fetched understanding which are unknown to human being may not invoke interest for a common readership. And then it's not by one passage or two, but dually manifest themselves in a general structure. So at a concentratively at a particular place, some grandeur is brought or some sublimity is brought, but then rest of the part is, I mean, ignored or left, you say, unchecked. So in that way also, it will be hampering the sublimity. But a sublime thought, if happily timed, illumines an entire subject with the vividness of a lightning flash and exhibits the whole power of the orator in a moment of time. So you see, when an orator came to the stage and he is now making his speech, so if only at 2-3 places he catches attention of audiences and receive applause, so it won't make his speech great. But if he continued his tempo with his empowered speech and influencing the audiences throughout, then his speech became great one. So obviously the tempo should continue throughout. It shouldn't be concentrated at 1 or 2 places or at different places. You know? So in this way, Sublime requires a continuity, sustainability throughout. Now here, he is now dealing with the understanding of Sublime as per the contemporary critic. Sublime, they tell us, is born in a man and not to be acquired by instruction. Okay. Now here, it is the general notion during that time that sublimity, I mean, born with a man. So it is inborn quality, he says, and not to be acquired by instruction. So sublimity cannot be acquired by instruction. Genius is the only master who can teach it. Okay, and the one who is genius, he is only having that ability to teach it. The vigorous product of nature, such as their view, are weakened and in every respect debased. Now here, Longinus is criticizing this particular idea. Okay, he is not agree to that. Okay, he further says, when robbed of their flesh and blood by frigid technicalities. So here, such ideas are frigid technicalities according to the Longinus. Now, what then is the idea? If he is refuting these ideas about sublimity, so what is then the idea of sublimity for Longinus? So he says, the true sublime uplifts our soul. It arises from lofty ideas clothed in lofty language. Okay, so true sublime uplifts our soul. So it's not that it is inborn, but if you acquire sublimity, it uplifts your soul. So in that way, it makes writer great. It arises from the lofty ideas. Okay, so if the lofty ideas of importance are there, with the lofty language, sublimity generates out of it. It gives us joy and exalts our spirits. Okay, like pleases all and pleases always. The false sublime consists merely gorgeous exterior which conceals nothing but emptiness. Sometimes the subject is shallow and with a high ornamentary words. Okay, so this is a false sublime. So it's not only because of some high words or some lofty words you are presenting a word, a work or a subject, okay, which has a weak its base. So in this way, in that way, it will be creating a false sublime for the readers. So only language, ornamentary language, cannot create the sublimity. So it is a two-wheel cycle, you see. One cycle is alone cannot drive the entire cycle. So both the will are required, okay, to balance and to run the cycle. A pompous language is used to clothe thoughts which are essentially trivial and puerile. Okay, a pompous language. So when pompous language is required, he says, when your subject is weak. So when the subject is weak, you always go along with the high ornamentary language. Okay, and in that case, that became trivial and puerile. So in this way, what writer here is maintaining the subject matter and the language suitable match to the subject is required. Now here we are coming to the main point of discussion of Longinus here. Okay, the entire discussion of Longinus is revolving around these are the 5 points of sublimity. Okay, and here we can say the 5 principles of Longinus about sublimity. So the first principle of sublimity according to Longinus is grandeur of thought, means the power of conceiving great thought. The second point is a vigorous and spirited treatment of the passion. Okay, now how do you deal, how do you adopt the method to present the subject? So obviously a vigorous and spirited treatment of the passion. So here the passion should be there poured from the writer. The third principle is a certain artifice in the employment of figure. So here writer's ability to introduce the figure of thought and figure of speech. So here figure of thought, it's again unheard of. Figure of thought is related to writer's ability to think and to power his thought process. And then figure of speech is related to the language, employment of language, composition of the stanza. The fourth principle of sublimity is dignified expression. Now here disclaimer sort of he has used dignified. The work should be dignified. The proper choice of words. So writer should be able to employ proper words, use of metaphor and other ornaments of diction. Okay, like simile and trochee, alliteration, onomatopoeia. Now these are the different figure of speeches are there. So writer must be able to employ all that properly. And the fifth and the final source of sublime is majesty and elevation of structure. Okay, now a particular work will follow a structure, like a poem, like an epic, tragedy. Now this will follow a structure, and that structure should have majesty. Okay, elevation. Like it's not like haphazardly, like you have a plot and you have just executed the action. Okay, it's not like that. So the structure should be elevated properly, majestically. Now after giving this synopsis of 5 points, Longinus go on discussing his point, and there is a long discussion. Almost 54 sections are there in this book. The available 54 sections are there where a writer is discussing in detail with reference to the contemporary writer. Many writers, those who are sublime and their work is sublime according to Longinus, they are dealt there, and those which are not following the principle of sublime, they are also discussed simultaneously. So in the original work, lots of examples are there to understand the idea of sublimity. But although we don't find the point maintained by or mentioned by Longinus are too difficult to understand even without example. So these 5 principles alone can give us the whole idea of Longinus on which he is developing his argument. So grandeur of thought springs from a great soul. Okay, now here on this single point, he agrees to the critics and the contemporary understanding. Okay, now it is inherited. So it is only, you say, grandeur of thought spring from a great soul. The truly eloquent must be free from low and ignoble thoughts. So the writer must be free from low and ignoble thoughts. Men with mean and servile ideas cannot attain sublimity. Okay, so the man who has great ability to think, great ability to understand, and to translate them into a lofty language, lofty images. Okay, they are only able to, spring or deliver grandeur of thought. The second point is here, the wise and systematic selection of important elements like events, emotions, passion contribute to the sublimity of style. Now, when a writer is talking about a tragedy, or he is preparing a tragedy or an epic, so the important element like event, now events are the episodes, okay, woven in a plot, and the emotions flow through the thoughts and the actors or the characters, and the passion contribute to the sublimity of style. So these are the different factors are there which contributes to the passion, okay, which creates or which execute the passion of writer, which helps create the sublimity in the work. Then one point he raised, amplification, to amplify, you know, to make it larger. So amplification of sublimity, the accumulation of relevant and telling details of the subject is closely associated with the sublimity. Now here, writer's intention or writer's limitation he has given, sublimity. So he has to elevate, amplify sublimity. So when a writer is amplifying sublimity, means the whole structure is under its influence. So even the farthest element from the center will be under the sublime influence. The sublimity consists in elevation, while amplification embraces a multitude of details. Now here is a differentiation is there. Now elevation, sublimity, and amplification, these are the two different things are here, little different with difference. Sublimity consists in elevation, and amplification embraces a multitude of details. So here, multitude of details are also required to make the work sublime. Although they are two different things, but yet they are closely related to each other. The imitation to previous great poets or writers is one of the great way to achieve sublimity. Now here, very important point is this, that one has to follow one ideal. You know, writer has to adopt or to follow certain masters, you know, masters works, writers work, to bring that sublimity, that greatness into their work. Okay, now they are not supposed to follow or adopt the style of his master. Now they have to understand the making of literature and the efforts taken by the master, or the way, the arrangement, okay, the way he has taken the plot, then introduction of the character, language, effect, and then the whole structure. So in this way, one has to follow this entire setup. In this way, one has to imitate the making of the literature from the masters. Now, when we come to the modern criticism, even in our present syllabus of paper 1 of criticism, at the last we are going to study the tradition and individual talent by T.S. Eliot. Now, when T.S. Eliot is talking about tradition, now tradition means here he simply want a writer to be the part of the tradition, to follow it. So obviously here he is somehow coming close to Longinus, okay, where Longinus is asking to imitate the master or a great writer. Okay, so obviously he wants them to be in a tradition, to be part of the tradition, to follow one tradition like that. Then the use of vivid figure or images also helps in creation of the sublime. Okay, now vivid figures. Now here, imagery and pictorial quality is very important. In Aristotle's Poetics, we have seen how one has to be able to conceive the idea. So here, Longinus is also of opinion that one has to conceive the idea before he project it. So not only he must be able to project his ideas in his mind and then he draw it down on the paper, and when it came to the hand of a reader, he must be able to enjoy the same image in his mind. So the translation equally should occur effectively in the mind of readers or audience. This is what the point we have to understand from Longinus. So the image is conceived by the writer is completely as it is, should be translated or transferred for the readers. Okay, so in this way, the literary creation should be there. The writer should see imaginatively what he describes and then try to create the similar illusion for the reader. So this word illusion is creating. So here, now we are imagining two minds are here. One writer's mind is here and one audience mind is here. So when audience is sitting there in the theater, or a reader is writing or reading a particular work, so he must be able to imagine the exact image as conceived by writer. This is what the idea of sublimity. Then the figure of speech, if properly handled, contribute to sublimity. So all the figure of speeches required, metaphor, simile, and rest of it, if used effectively, it contributes to sublimity. But the figures should be used appropriately at the right place. So while a writer feels it necessary, in that way, a figure of speech is to be employed. Unnecessarily, at unnecessary place, figure of speech may create, weak impression and can weaken the work. So in this way, appropriation is to be, observed. Figures should be used in a natural manner. Like you see, even figures we use in our natural day-to-day language. So they are picked from the society. It's not again far-fetched and manufactured. Okay, so here no such manufactured ideas are to be employed. They should be natural in a flow of language. Apostrophe. Okay, apostrophe is again a technique, figure. It is an effective use of an appeal or address to steer the emotion. So sometimes you see apostrophe create a, to steer the emotion. All of a sudden, if some question is created, or answer is expected. Sometimes you see some question are there to create effect, not to answer. Okay, so such rhetorical use of question and answer often makes the language more effective and impressive. You know, so in this way, it invoke liveliness for readers. Figures such as anaphora. Anaphora means repetition of words. Okay, sometimes words are repeated. Then ditopsis, like vivid description, may be combined together to impart vigor, cogency, and beauty to speech. So here simultaneously, Longinus is talking about writing as well as he is talking about oratory. Okay, because orator is also supposed to, I mean, bring in his oratory some elements of, you say, sublimity. Okay, so using of speeches, figures make can make his language or can make his work so influential. Sometimes we see some orators are so influential, you know, like if you ever uh, hear the speech of Martin Luther King, so it enchanted the I mean audience, you know. So even today we can get you say poetic appeal from the Martin Luther King. So some speakers are born orators. Now, why are they born orator? Because they are, I mean, with the passage of time, became master over the language of speech, language of oratory, and repetition, and vivid description. Okay, now it creates a kind of a influence over the readers and audiences. Now, I would simply ask you sometimes, if you have time, to just download one speech on YouTube, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream." It's a great speech, and "I Have a Dream" is repeated many a times, and that speech gives you the pictorial understanding of writer about the society of equal society of America based on equality between whites and the blacks. So that speech can give you the idea of sublimity. Now that speech, I can find it as a sublime and follows the ideas of Longinus. Now here, hyperbole. Now here consists in inversion of natural order of words and thoughts. It carries the very effect of violent mental agitation. The figure gives a touch of reality to speech and produces the natural effect of emotion. So it is obviously hyperbole. No, hyperbole. Now sometimes you see some ideas are presented, okay, something with flavor. So it consists in the inversion of a natural order of words and thoughts. It carries a very effect of violent and mental agitation. Okay, so it expresses the violent and mental agitation through the word. The figure gives a touch of reality to speech and produces the natural effect of emotion. So it makes the particular incidents with the thought as if it is a real one. Then Polyphoto. It consists in the interchange of one case for another. On number for one number to the another, for one tense to the another, and for one person to the another. So it is again the mechanism. It is a kind of a mechanism. It's a grammatical exercise, you know, like we sometimes make the singular to plural. We change the case of subject, you know. So in this way of exercise in the grammar, this is came under Polyphoto. So it is an excellent weapon of public oratory and contributes to the sublimity. Okay, so in this way, generalizing it from particular to generalization. Now this is again a kind of a technique, helps in oratory. Then periphrasis. It also contributes much to the sublime and adds greatly to the beauty of language. Then writer come to a noble diction and sublimity. Okay, now what way a noble diction is to be adopted or learned skillfully, and the sublimity. The choice of proper and striking word is essential for producing sublimity. Now here you see many a times we heard writer took many months to compose a single poem to complete it. You know? Sometimes we see some writer go on, revisiting their work and revising them again and again, okay, to make it more effective. Now, why do they do that? It's only to make it more effective, relevant, and all time. So the arrangement of word, arrangement of a diction is very important. So the noble diction is the fact one has to achieve, and for that he has to labor a lot. You know, like sometimes the tempo which is initiated cannot last for a long, and in that way writer lost tempo and he's unable to complete the poem. Now indeed in that case, Coleridge is the one who is unfortunate. Some of his poem, great poem, in although they are incomplete, they are a masterpiece, you know, but he was unable to complete them, the Christabel and Kubla Khan. These are the poems where he was unable to complete them. Okay, so here a noble diction is important, and for that writers playing with the words, searching of right word and then using it appropriately, you know, with the required structure of that word in the diction. But here you see he cautioned, but inappropriate magnificence of diction should be avoided. Okay, so inappropriate magnification of diction. So appropriate and inappropriate. You know? What is good and what is bad? This is what a writer should understand. Use of metaphors contributes a great deal to the sublime. So metaphorical language is obviously a beauty to give you to understand and to enjoy the work. Metaphors should be used in impassioned and descriptive passages only. Okay, again, as to where it to be used, impassioned and descriptive passages, there metaphor are to be used. The proper time for using metaphor is when the passion rolls like a torrent and sweep a multitude of them down their restless food. So you see, there should be a time. Okay, like you see, whenever there is a pick or tip is arrived at that place, that particular metaphor is to be used. So with the explanation or with the narration, okay, time to time some figures are required there to create a certain effect. So at one point some metaphor will give effect, sometimes simile will pour effect, alliteration will give effect, onomatopoeia will give effect. So in this way, all the way, these are the different figure at different places will create effect. And in this way, writer has to understand the importance of a particular figure of speech at a particular place. A genius with some faults is better than. Now, this is important point. A genius with some faults is better than the flawless mediocre. Okay, now here, a genius is the one who may make some mistakes. So here, writer says that genius is acceptable who commits some mistake, but a flawless mediocre. Mediocre is the one who is not skilled. Mediocre is the one who is not having that genius, and he is mechanically learned way he's following the flawless expression, but he's not genius. He is only technically sound. He's technically, writing the work. It is simply as a man who learned technicalities and he's standing on a pitch and he's trying to, hit the ball to the six and found himself clean bowled. Okay, so this is what the idea Longinus is expressing. Okay, so a genius with some fault is better, because if a genius makes a small mistake in a work, that will be acceptable. Okay. Similes like metaphors are also contributes to the sublimity. Okay, so here collectively he's talking about the figure of speech. So obviously similes are equal to metaphors, and that also contributes to the sublimity. Hyperbole may be used in describing the great as well as the small. So hyperbole are often used sometimes to expresses some of the ideas as great and sometimes as the smaller. Okay, so gravity to express, seriousness to express, hyperboles are used. The harmonious arrangement of the word is the fifth source of sublime. Okay, the fifth one is the harmonious arrangement of a word. Like previously in the Aristotle's poetics also, we have understood arrangement of a word in a metrical composition. That is important. So here he is upholding the idea of Aristotle, and the harmonious arrangement of a word is a fifth source of sublime. It reaches our soul and contributes to the lofty utterances and passion. So the composition of a single line in a metrical way, okay, in a particular meter, trochee or iambic, and then it is comes with the required figure of speech, that is the instance of sublimity. A sentence has its own organic structure, and it arises from a harmonious arrangement of words. A sentence has its own organic structure. Okay, now this is important thing, because when we talk of a particular sentence, it is meaningful because it expresses a certain message. It expresses a complete message to make an action. Okay, so in this way, a sentence is an organic structure and it arises from a harmonious arrangement of words. So a sequence is to be proper. Grammatical word and the lexical word are supposed to be structured, subject, verb, and object in this way. Broken and agitated language lost the dignity and made the composition mean. Okay, so in this way, the broken and agitated language lost the dignity. Okay, so this is the fall of sublime. Broken languages, broken expressions are the fall of, you say, grandeur. Grandeur is overshadowed when the thought is brought into too narrow a compass. Okay, now when the thought of a writer for a particular idea or for a particular story, narration is, you say, narrow. So obviously it will be narrow the compass. And in that way, the grandeur will be lost. Similarly, overextension also makes the style lifeless. Sometimes overextension, over-exaggeration, that is also the causes for the loss of sublimity. And the final point in this work is low and undignified vocabulary also disfigure the sublimity. Okay, low and undignified vocabulary. Okay, so in this way, the vocabulary understood and chosen by the writer is to be dignified. You know? So derogatory words and the word which are not acceptable in society, unparliamentary, obscene, all that are to be, removed, not to be adopted for the making of literature. So in this way, writer has developed his argument around the 5 important points. I am going back to those 5 principles And with that, we'll conclude this lecture. The first point we have to, in the summary, we have to remember the first point of principle of source of sublime is grandeur of thought. That is the power of conceiving great thought. Number two, a vigorous and spirited treatment of the passion. Number three, a certain artifice in the employment of figure, that is figure of thought and figure of speech. Fourth point is dignified expression, the proper choice of word and the metaphors and other ornament of diction. And the fifth point is majesty and elevation of structure. So in this way, the whole discussion of on the sublime is based and around these 5 points are there. Okay, so now if you people have any question or query, you can post me on YouTube, and you can also chat in the WhatsApp group, and you can also discuss any of your difficulties in the following lecture. For now, I conclude today's topic on the sublime. Tomorrow we'll be coming back with unit 2 with the background. For now, the topic of discussion is over. Have a nice day, and thank you all for having giving me a patient listening. Thank you.